Hey guys, welcome back to another AASPT podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about, gender and the NSCA and CSCS and maybe some CPSS kind of talk and how a strength coach navigates some of those certifications and a whole bunch of other stuff. So sit back, enjoy, and we're going to roll into this. All right, I'm gonna change myself from the big person here to the normal person. Let's see how we can do that. There we go. Again, I'm Scott Greenberg. We're surrounded by an amazing panel, Miles and Megan and Chris and Katie, our special guest today. So I'm gonna throw it over to Chris and have him introduce our wonderful speaker today and person we're gonna drill with a whole bunch of questions, Katie. So go ahead, Chris.
That's right. Well, thanks everybody for attending. Katie, rock star, dude. I'm super pumped for this. I think it's gonna be a blast. I'll turn it over to you here in a second to give a background, but as a strength and conditioning coach, we love with these podcasts to expand the breadth, like get other and create multidisciplinary conversations. So as a group of PTs, I think, especially with this group, having a unique interest in strength and conditioning, this kind of collaboration is massive. It's huge for us.
Sure.
The more that we can do this, the better. There's no question that our two professions have grown extremely close over the years, if not overlapping in quite some interesting areas, which some of the certification stuff we'll talk about. But as a Go Tiger here, tell us how you got back to the promised land, because I mean everybody here is jealous. Including the Florida fans and the UK fans on this, but like, trust me, they don't. Look,
this is like the SEC podcast here. We're gonna change the title of it.
Megan shows up in her UK quarter zip. Like, it's fine.
To be fair,
Megan.
this was
we'll
just,
give you
I already had it on. It wasn't.
Yes. Okay. So. Yeah, that's right. So background for you, and then how long have you been in your current role with LSU gymnastics, et cetera?
Yeah. God, I can go into depth about this, but kind of the Cliff Notes version. I played softball at LSU a long time ago. I don't know if you want me to show my age here, but
that's up to you. What position, though? What position? Because this matters.
You gotta guess. This is my thing. When people ask what position, I say guess, because I'm just curious about what I look like. I don't have to. So
I'm gonna say shortstop, second base, or center.
Oh, third time's a charm. Center.
All right.
Yeah.
See, I was in the
when you're in high school and travel ball and stuff, you kind of rotate around and play a plethora of positions. But outfield anywhere. And when you're an outfielder, you, not to say you don't specialize in a certain position, but you can rotate easily. So if they need to right field one game and center the next game, it's an easy transition. So I was an athlete back in the day until 2012, essentially. And had two head coaches there over my time, drastically different, which was great for me, which we'll talk about later if we want. And after I got done playing, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went into private training. Like, I knew I loved physical fitness as an athlete. I had 3 knee surgeries just in my time as an athlete. So I took to physical therapy. I took to our sports medicine team, and I took to our strength coach. And spent a lot of individual time with all those people. And unfortunately, fortunately now, because those relationships have kind of piloted where I am now. So I got done playing. I went on to do private training at Traction Sports Performance Training in Baton Rouge. I was his first female hire, really making no money, to the point where I couldn't, I loved it, but I couldn't pay my bills, and that was kind of a thing with my parents. Yeah. My graduation gift was all my bills, and they said, "We love you, but grow up."
I love the game.
Yeah. So continue to kind of give lessons, and I coached a travel ball team for a little bit, and out of New Orleans, and then worked at the hospital and the Cardiovascular Institute for a little bit in Baton Rouge, and then really just kind of said, what's going to take my career to the next level. And I kind of felt stuck, and my entire family was in the medical field. And once I got in it, I was like, this ain't for me. So that's when I looked to get back into a graduate assistant position as a strength and conditioning coach and winded up at Liberty University, kind of fell in my lap again through LSU connections, and then was there, got hired on full time. Eventually, after 4.5 years, went to the University of Illinois via LSU connections.
Yeah, right.
And then I was there for about 3.25, and then my mentor, my old strength coach, and now my boss, Melissa Seal Moore, is, called me up and basically said, we have a position open. I think you would fit great. And the rest is history. So again, I've kind of gotten, and not that I needed their help, but it just kind of worked out that way where every job that I've had, I've been fortunate enough to have great people in my corner from LSU. And it's kind of come full circle to come back to it. So super honored and yeah, it's a dream come true.
It's the power of connections, though, right? I mean, there's no doubt in this world. Yeah, and
to be good people. Like you can have great connections, but if you're a shitty human being, no one's gonna want to do anything for you. So
it matters.
Yeah,
those impressions last and matter, right? I mean, especially. I want to go back to something. I'm curious. You growing up, and again, we'll stay modest here. We won't highlight your age, right? But growing up, were you a gym rat? Like, was that something that you were interested in?
Honestly, I wasn't, and I wish I was, but I just no one in my family ever lifted or worked out or did anything. My dad was very active. Like, obviously in Louisiana, we grew up in the woods, we grew up hunting. My active. This was how I spent my years as a middle school and high schooler. Okay. Being active, he gave me a machete and we went in the woods over the weekend and cleared deer lanes. And that's how I learned movement. And now you look back on it and the amount of fascial training that I did was fantastic, but that was kind of my natural strongman training, if you will. I was always an undersized kid. I still am to this day. But we didn't have the money, the resources, or the knowledge, or I was never exposed to, understanding what that could do for you. I got recruited late. So those things really didn't lay the foundation of curiosity for me to start investing in myself until probably 8 months before my freshman year of college. Now my dad worked at the hospital and he had a gym membership at the hospital. And sometimes I'd go and work out with him, few and far between. But we also had jobs. That was a part of my parents' thing. If you're old enough to drive, you have to have a job. And with me playing sports, there were summers where I was playing summer ball and I was working 3 jobs. So it was very busy. Yeah. A different hustle. And I guess it really, I don't want to make excuses and say I couldn't, because I could have. I just wasn't even, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Well, the interesting thing is, right, and now and we'll get to certainly more and more about your work with LSU gymnastics, but do you find that the stigma associated with, and again, in your scenario, in your case, physical training growing up in my world was certainly not a huge priority when I was young, but it was especially not a priority for females in that time as well.
Yeah.
What have you seen in that transition? I mean, do you have athletes coming through now that I'm sure are very tuned in and tuned up towards strength and conditioning, towards gym, based integration? I mean, is that kind of the standard at this point?
Yeah, I think it's a good mix. I think everyone appreciates it now, especially if I verbalize it as sports performance, which is what it is. I'm not fluffing anybody. But understanding where the sport is naturally, where the culture of that sport is naturally going to fall. So for gymnastics, they're naturally going to be I don't want to get big, and rightfully so. You got to understand that they're saying that for a reason. Yes, they have a terrible history in their sport that's unhealthy emotionally and physically, but on the back end, if I'm not careful and I put too much muscle and too much weight on them, I ruin their rhythm on bars. I ruin their rhythm on floor, and you ruin timing sequences. Then you wind up getting them hurt. So it's definitely a delicate balance. With my other team, like beach volleyball, man, they burn so many calories. I'm you couldn't put on weight if you tried. You burn so many calories. It doesn't matter. So I even if sometimes we do kind of microdose a hypertrophy block in there, I don't tell them. I don't tell them at all. And it doesn't happen often, but I hope that they see my passion in that through what I do, because you mentioned, was I a gym rat? No, but once I got to college and I was this undersized kid and I started lifting and I gained 20 pounds my freshman year, I fell in love with it, which is
Sign me up.
You're seeing now.
Yeah.
But, I hope that they can still see that. And I have a great mix of kids that come in and they're like, I want to do bis and tris, and female athletes, because like I've built the culture of that now, and I tell them, like, I'll say yes to you if we do this, so it's not always aesthetics. I do tie some performance things in there if they're looking to do extra and things like that.
But bis and tris are dessert. That's dessert.
Oh, they're dessert. And I've done it. Here's what I love. I've done a great job in my, and I'm not saying this because of me. My coaching staffs and I are very close, and they come in and lift all the time. So for Squattober, the beach staff and I, everybody down to our director of ops, like
squatting every day.
We're doing it, and then on max out day, we invited everyone to come watch. So like some of our athletes they see us getting after it. I'm even like asking our athletes, I'm like, you want to give me the heat? And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, this is your one opportunity to slap me on the back. They're like, oh yeah. So I kind of let them see the meathead side of that too. But I hope that I can express that as a female, you can enjoy this. And I hope that they see, like, I'm not huge and bulky. I'm still this slender kid, that you can be strong, because they're like, no way you squat 200 pounds. No way you do, like, and they see that. And I don't look it, but they can see that strong doesn't mean size. And
I've got a question too, Katie.
Yeah.
You started in softball, and obviously that was like your love child. When you went to Liberty, like, how did you transition into these other sports? Was it more kind of what was available? Like, did you want to do softball, but you've ended up in gymnastics? And sort of like, how has that transition been with, sometimes it's different if you haven't played a sport, like how do you then integrate into that culture and like relate to the athletes if you didn't necessarily play that? Especially gymnastics it's a whole different beast.
Such a good question. Obviously softball was always my entry point, right? I went to Liberty to primarily, we don't have primary sports, but the sport that you're probably going to automatically spend the most time with. Obviously the softball coaches and I went way back, and I was the closest with them whenever getting to campus at Liberty. And it especially, 8-9 years ago, you didn't have only one sport, especially at a mid-major. So, that you're going to have at least 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 of the sports, depending on where you are. So it's basically just what's available. And when I got there, I had softball, cheerleading, and I think men's golf. And then after that first semester, we had a changeover with a director. Great changes. Was able to add a position, and then they switched me to softball and men's and women's tennis, I think. And so I held there for about 2 years, I think, and then but another change in directors and stuff. So then I had I kept those 3 and then added women's swimming and diving. Again, I had never really had experience with those, but you just learn. Like if I'm young, I soak it up. I have good rapport with the coaches, and the athletes have great buy-in, and I'm building a great culture. Not that I can do whatever I want, but I can gain respect a lot without actually having played that sport. And you know what? Sometimes I'd go out on court with those kids and make a fool of myself on purpose to show them that I want to learn and I'm invested and things like that. And that was just all to get buy-in. And then swimming and diving and softball actually piloted me to Illinois because I had those 2 sports and women's and men's gymnastics. Now, my entryway to gymnastics was I knew the women's gymnastics coach had issues with previous strength coaches, and she just wanted someone to trust. So like I knew the angle I could take going in to earn trust. And my cousin, the only other person, not even to do collegiate sports, but to compete in any sport past high school. My cousin was in the Olympics, 2008 Olympics for gymnastics. So I went there, and that was an easy tie-in. So whenever I introduced myself to these teams, I'm like, look, I I've been around my cousin, she's been around gymnastics her whole life. And that was kind of an easy buy-in. And then what piloted me to LSU was obviously softball and gymnastics and swimming and diving. And then that was honestly hard for me to give up softball. I was worried about am I ready? Seriously, like, hey, do I go back to LSU, my alma mater, and take a bunch of pride and joy in what I'm about to do? Am I ready to give up softball? And I would never take that from my director. My strength coach is still the strength coach to this day, and obviously they have great rapport. They've done a great job. And honestly, I just when I need a little fix, I just go over to practice and lift and get out a bit, and it's worked out well. And I couldn't be happier, to be honest with you. It has surprised me in all the best ways. We're just in a people's business. That's what it ultimately comes down to, man.
Yeah. But you feel like a lot of the principles and kind of what you're doing carry over from sport to sport.
Yeah.
Or do you feel like you kind of have to relearn everything when you
both? And I think that's the fun side. Like, I would get bored if I only had one sport for as long as I'm in this profession. I would get so bored. I'm way too ADD for that. But I go out and I ask them questions, and like I watch practice, I observe, and I make a fool of myself on purpose sometimes, and it just helps me learn and be open. And I think that's exactly what it comes down to, is just continually being open and learning. And I've been working with gymnastics now for 4 or 5 years, and I'm still learning stuff every day. It's just different.
Oh, I'm sure.
Through is different,
Hey, Katie, I got a technical question for you. Go back to that hypertrophy block. I know this kind of pivots a little bit, but what do you like for hypertrophy training? Where do you fall on the continuum? Are you low percent, high volume? Are you intentionally kind of at a specific percent with quote RPE, quote tonnage, quote time under tension? Where are you at on that?
Good question. I don't like to do too much time under tension, but especially with a sport like gymnastics, we do spend a lot of time in isometric blocks.
Okay.
But I go moderate weight for sure.
Okay.
I always like to teeter that, because at the end of the day, if I'm addressing a weak point, they're going to have a strength adaptation to that no matter what. Again, I don't spend a lot of time on it, but moderate percentages, moderate volume, especially with a sport like gymnastics, like I make them too sore, and guess what? Coach is coming after me. So I have to make sure I dose that correctly. So I don't do a crazy amount of volume. And I keep the weight relatively, in your 70 and 80% range.
Modest,
really.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I was curious of, right? Because the big hotness that has kind of taken some shells recently is getting closer to like proximity to failure. And as you get closer, and if not actually getting to relative failure with hypertrophy blocks, it works, but it'll make you sore. And I would imagine that is not acceptable for certain populations. And so I was more so curious if you're using internal RPE as in them giving a feedback of proximity to failure, or just based on doing a decent bit of volume, because I imagine a lot of their stuff is power based.
Yeah.
Just doing some moderate, higher volume, which is still relatively moderate, but that's enough to kind of get a hypertrophy adaptation for y'all.
Yeah, because you know what? They do their in-gym circuits. And one of those circuits is honestly going to give you your burnout fatigue hypertrophy effect.
Yeah. Okay.
And they don't know that. Like the girls really have no clue, but the way that the coaches want to design that to do in-gym specific gymnastics work and the time and attention that they have, you're really covering those bases there. So I make sure that if I am trying to tap into that, I take the opposite route of that, because they're going to get that burnout or failure in gym.
Hey, Katie, I have a question. So I work closely with the Florida gymnastics team, and I know over the years, and this goes back years, but I know there was a stigma, like a lot of gymnastics coaches felt that the strength and conditioning portion of their athletes' preparation came from gymnastics specific strengthening, right? Yeah. So the whole getting in the weight room back in the day was a lot less normal. it's obviously becoming a lot more normal as time goes on. And in today, yes, absolutely. But have you ever seen or heard athletes that you've worked with? Because again, LSU is an elite gymnastics program, obviously, just like Florida, where the athletes weren't accustomed to working out prior to getting to college and then having to make that transition to lifting weights in college. Because again, kids at that level, they're in the gym 6-7 days a week, hours upon hours, and they're not in the weight room. And then coming to college, they have to manage the weight room demands on top of the gymnastics demand. And how did you manage that?
Yeah, again, kind of tying back to Chris's hypertrophy question. Again, I don't spend a ton of time on it. There's probably 2 or 3 weeks in the summer, 2 or 3 weeks in the fall that I can kind of hammer that home. And I don't need a huge effect. I honestly, I'm just trying to make sure we have our legs underneath us before we hit 20-hour weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I am shocked if I ever get a kid who is an incoming freshman who has ever lifted weights consistently.
Absolutely.
They're absolutely an anomaly. And I know that coming in. And my job is to make them feel comfortable, make them feel safe, help them learn like what different exercises are, what it means, what's the difference between a kettlebell and a dumbbell, how much does a safety bar weigh versus a barbell and a trap bar. And it's just a huge learning experience for them. And I really slow cook them. We do a lot of things, especially in the summer, based off of body weight. So everything is percentage body weight. 1, because I don't have maxes on them. 2, it's everyone, like your sport is relative, right? So we look at forces that their joints and tendons take over time, pounding. Everything's relative to them and what they do in the gym. So I do a lot of that just to help standardize a lot of the load that we have. And honestly, I know that gyms across the country, and I say gyms meaning like club level gyms, gyms across the country, they want to be a one-stop shop. So I know anything that they have, it's going to be like light dumbbells, light med balls, TRX bands, little mini bands. I know that they're not like, I know that the worst thing I can do whenever they get here is automatically like put a barbell on their back and squat them heavy. Like, not only is that not safe by any means, but psychologically, like I will scare some of them to death. So we integrate that in with body weight percentages. We do a lot of dumbbell work, and I make sure that I hit some things that are gymnastic specific to kind of help them see that, hey, this is not a meathead football. Yes, it's not a meathead football lift. This is why we're doing it. And I tell them from day one, if you ever want to know why we're doing something, ask and I'll tell you. And that's my job. If I can't tell you, I have no rapport with putting it in the program. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
On that same vein, what's that communication like with the coaches at LSU? Because I feel like, you think about LSU and their coaching staff, you think about like Boo Schexnayder, Tommy Moffitt, all these kind of guys.
Yeah, those are my dudes.
And I feel like I'm curious to know, like from those old heads, like what's it like kind of integrating, I guess kind of get back to the CPSS stuff too. And then kind of, I'm sure communicating with the position coaches, like what is that like, that are, these old dogs that are trying to digest maybe the sports science that's a little bit new. Yeah.
It honestly begins with the head coach. Jay Clark he's so good. He's so good to work with. He demands a lot from us, but he's an open book. He doesn't think he knows it all. He will ask questions and it is my job to prepare answers for him. We have, I'll put it this way. Our football team has a pair of Vald force plates over at their place. The entire football team has one pair. We have a pair that sits at our gymnastics facility. So we have an entire pair that no other team uses, just them. And we test upper body, we jump lower body twice a week all year round. And those jumps obviously vary depending on the time of the year, but I supply data to our kids. Like I let them know every time we jump what their highest jump is. And basically I run that data, I clean it, I run it, and then I make sure they know any red flags before practice ever starts. Now what they do with that is up to them. And I let them know that, hey, athlete A, athlete B, they're in the red today. I don't know what they have planned. I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but here's kind of what I noticed. If you don't have to go overboard on them today, don't. And then And that's outside the obvious. Like, obviously, if a kid sprains her ankle and she can't walk, obviously she's not going to do a full practice. But these are kids, like, when you are really truly looking at readiness, that is not my job, but it is a huge contribution to that. So there are certain metrics that I track and I let them know, and I'm super transparent. I put up leaderboards for our kids every month, and that could be averages, that could be our PRs, that could be month to month, year to year. Like, there's many different charts, upper body, lower body. So I'm kind of breeding competition all year round, and the coach, it's right there for the coaches to see. And it's another recruiting tool. Like, when our recruits come in, I let them know, hey, I'm super transparent with our data. You want to know why we're jumping? You want to know what this means? I'll tell you. And then what I do is I globally look at where our team stands, and that helps guide your programming, right? And then as well as bucketing, especially once we get into season. If I notice certain jumps are off or what's going to work, if we have velocity deficit versus force deficit kids, we're working different types of jumps, and it's all just microdosing. That's what it is. I never do a ton with them. They're getting in their sport every day. But if I am going to test something, use some piece of technology, not only am I going to be transparent and let them see that data, but I am going to use that data to either longitudinally track trends over time and or baseline them every semester, and or help guide what we do and how we're doing it,
Yeah.
I'll say.
Go ahead, Meg.
Thank you. Like, to go off of that, were those systems in place before you got there, or is that something that you decided to implement?
A little bit. The force plates were there. I think they were jumping once or twice a week, sporadically, but I've since then kind of advance that to some upper body ash testing, some NOR board testing, things like that. We're able to better track. And don't get me wrong, obviously we still have kids that are, beat up. That's just a sport, unfortunately. But if we can help guide and save one kid from an ACL or an Achilles or, a labral tear in the shoulder, that's kind of my goal. So, or kids coming back from injury, or surgery, to use it as tools to help guide. Hey, they're at 80% of the other shoulder, 80% of the other foot. So I think they're in the clear to start doing things. So it's just another way the athletic trainer or sports medicine team and I kind of gather data together to help guide what this athlete is ready for or not.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it is so hard to get the upper coaches or other people to maybe get buy-in to continue to do that type of testing. Like you said, football's got one pair of force plates. Do you think it's easier maybe with like smaller groups, or like, how do you think is a good way if maybe the coaches or the other staff aren't maybe fully bought in on it, how to try to show value in that like serial data tracking?
Well, I think the coaches have to value what you do first. And I think it's our job to prove to them what we could do. So, Rachel Balkovich, she said it best a long time ago, like, not only do you have to get a seat at the table, but you have to keep a seat at the table. So I work for male, or not work with male coaches. So I as a female have to understand that, not that I have to prove anything to them, but there's so much technology now. I need to provide a rationale for what I'm doing and why, and here's how we're getting better. So if they come and they say, hey, I feel like we're weaker in this area than we were last year. Hey, here's where we're not. It may appear that way, but I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying what you think may be something different than what it actually is. So if you think that we're not as strong in the lower half this year, here's evidence saying that we are. However, maybe there's something that maybe some accessory I have not programmed, or maybe something in gym conditioning that you guys are doing less of that may be contributing to that. So it just creates opportunity for conversations. And the two assistants, the floor coach and the beam coach and I, we meet. First of all, as a staff, we meet every week. So we touch base on every athlete every week. And then the two assistant coaches and I, we help kind of build, that was a goal of ours to be better at this year. We help kind of build our in-gym circuits all year round and kind of manage that. So what I've done better as well is again, creating a plyometric count. So, they want to know where all these calf strains or Achilles, all these things are coming from. Well, let's dissect and really categorize, hey, warm-ups, in-gym stuff, and then what I'm doing in the weight room. And then whenever things go awry or we start noticing things pop up, let's see where our huge spike is. They don't, understand acute to chronic workload ratios. And I know there's a lack of evidence there that will that supports injuries. However, it does give you a gradual sense of how to increase load over time or decrease load over time, and kind of really guiding them on that and teaching the staff on how to view certain things that they're doing in gym. So it's just educating and having conversations with the coaches as well to best manage it. And look, we still have a long way to go. We do. There's things that on a day-to-day basis that, we live in a chaotic world, and college athletics itself is chaotic, but even so, you take the sport of gymnastics in that, and it is absolute chaos. So trying our best to at least control the controllables and go from there.
I think
Sorry,
also,
Chris,
I'm sorry, Meg.
No,
I was just gonna say real quick.
Question.
I was gonna say real quick. With the level of gymnastics that you work in and such, knowledge is power, and looking for that advantage in any way, shape, or form is really critical, right? So if you can prove to a coach that you're going to give them value that maybe other programs don't have, or other information that you can dive into that would maybe give your team an advantage over another team, they would be silly not to jump in and jump aboard that, right? So I think most coaches at that level can see that side of it. And as long as you, as the practitioner of that, utilize the equipment and show them value, I can't see any reason why they wouldn't buy in.
And the most important part of that, Scott, is not for that coach to like me. It is for the best interest of these athletes. That's it.
100%.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah. I was going to ask. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So you're obviously in the strength and conditioning role, but you're also kind of taking on this sports scientist role as well. I've seen both, where sometimes the strength and conditioning coach is taking that on in addition. But then I also sometimes see where there's a dedicated sports scientist on staff. Do you feel like the sports scientist role is something that the strength and conditioning coaches should be taking on, or how do you feel about there being like people now coming out who are dedicated sports scientists, or is this sort of like a turf war between? It kind of reminds me of ATPT type situation. So where like, is it part of your job description, or should there be somebody more specialized?
Answer is D, all of the above. I do think there's absolutely crossover. Do I think there needs to be a dedicated sports scientist, especially now at our level? Absolutely. You just can't. I would run myself sick. There's so many times where in our AMS system, I look over at my director. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And then literally I give it a break, and 2 weeks later I'm back in it. Because I think there's value in it. I think it's important. Is it where our field is going? Absolutely. But I don't want to get in it just because it's where our field is going. I want to get in it because there's value in that, and there's action to be taken off of that value that can lead us to better decision making in the process for these athletes, right? So in my area, you look at like a strength coach as a CEO of themselves and their team. Like, we take care of culture. We're handling nutrition, liaisons and connections. We're taking care of conditioning. We're taking care of weight room. We're taking care of return to play. We're taking care of sports science. I do think all those things are blended in some fashion. But I do think in its best form, getting the best utilization out of it, whether you're looking at it as a high performance model or not, I think, a department needs a sports scientist stand alone. I can't sit here and run all this data and clean it and expect to know how to code and build this. Like, I've been dealing with our AMS system for 2 years now, and I still sit with our rep every other week and troubleshoot some things that are going on, So it's a lot to take in, and it's definitely a field within itself. Do I think that in a perfect world, when I first got to LSU, they were Chris White, who was overseeing women's basketball, and Lauren Green, who was overseeing men's basketball. They were a huge part of me taking the LSU job because those two guys were going to head that for us, and I wanted to learn underneath them. Within 6 months, both of them were gone, unfortunately, and that's not because they weren't good at their job. That's because the power of the head coaches, which I won't even begin to talk on, hence the eye roll. Power of the head coaches let two good people go. And that's not a diss to people who are in their place now, but those two dudes are hella smart. And they understood things that not every strength coach does. And the opportunity to sit in an office with them or a weight room with them and learn underneath them, I was like geeking out over it because I knew in my mind, I'd been in this field long enough to have the basics down. You know, I felt like I built a good enough culture. What was the next step? The next step was kind of diving into this and seeing how I can better help and advance myself and my programming and my craft, if you will, to help our athletes in that realm. Now, when they left, we had already bought the same AMS system, Smartabase. SEC was moving to Smartabase and all this kind of stuff. So now we're like, okay, we spent all this money. We know this is where it's going. Who's going to run it? And I looked over at my boss and I was like, I'll do it. So it kind of fell in my lap. Now I'm not doing that as a full-time job. That is literally like once everything in my actual job description gets done, then I can go around and play around with this. And it's exciting. I love it. It keeps me on my toes. And it's definitely something that I'm learning continuously and is ever evolving at a rapid pace. But it interests me for sure. But I definitely don't. I know that a sports scientist that is dedicated to that can sit here, that I can either sit next to or run into their office and say, hey, I need you to do a layover of this force plate, this Nord board. I need to see this kid with this and the RSI and see how this correlates and run these correlations and get it back to me by the end of the week. Or, hey, overlay this chart and create this dashboard for me. I believe that, we should not have to do that. Now, I will if I have to, but again, I'm not an expert in that. So I think that's where you leave an expert to their craft,
Okay, along the lines of the Nord boards, the force plates, what other systems are y'all deploying? Like I know that Perch is an option too.
Yeah, we got so much.
We have Polar. I worked with a guy at LSU who was he swore by Perch, and we used it, and for better or for worse, some days it picked up the barbell, some days it didn't.
Yeah, and that's technology. Like if my athletes know there's been days where I don't see red often and I try and stay consistent as possible. But there's been days where they come in and they're like, oh, and they walk away because I am so livid because technology time again. And I keep going back to it. I'm like, okay, don't use it. And then a month goes by and I'm like, I need to use it. But we have everything. It's a blessing and a curse, which is why I don't want to sit here and just test the test or use these things to use these things. I either want to play around with them myself to where I know how to use them, to where if I'm ever in a situation with an athlete or a team where that would benefit them to do that, I already know how to do it. Or if a special case of like another coach needs to use something and they don't know how to work the machine, that I know how to do that. Not only does it build my resume and help me understand things as a whole, and I get my hands on a lot of things, but I'm able to kind of grow and make sense. And what this does over time is it kind of puzzle pieces things together, and it's fun for me. But we have everything from philosophy-based training. We have Perch, we have Tendo units, we have, I don't know, they're called eNode Pro now. They're little magnets on the bar. We have Gym Aware over at, not Gym Aware, form over at football. We have basically everything Bald makes. We have at least one of. When it comes to Exxon, we have Polar, we have Whoop, we have just about anything.
When it comes
any
to
sports science technology.
Yeah, like
for the most part, man, it's crazy. Now I don't use all of it, but I'm just in the broad scheme, including football and basketballs. Yeah, we have just about everything.
When it comes to like reporting that stuff and posting it, it kind of sounds like you took a page out of Tony Holler's book and you're kind of creating this competitive You know,
Oh,
like,
for sure. And with both my teams.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what are you posting? You know, like, what are kind of the nitty gritties of that?
Oh yeah, so especially in force plates is the easiest one, right?
Mm.
Where the athletes know and care about the most, jump height. I can sit there and say, hey, your average relative braking impulse is this. They're gonna be like, they don't know what that means, you know. That stuff's for me, but for them, they care about jump height, and that's what I breed. So that's their language, right? So what I basically do is either create averages of times of jumps, or I create like averages of dates, time frames, should I say? Let me clarify. And then all-time leaderboard. You know, if we're looking at any isometric test, obviously, if I'm doing like an IASH test, I look at force, I look at time to peak force, things like that. So any metric that's easy to explain to them, I look at, and I just create a leaderboard over time. And what we do is both of the teams I work with, we have separate teams or multiple teams within the team that compete all fall, all semester, all spring, all year. And basically I entice them by saying, hey, if we PR, you get points for this team. And like when they PR, they go crazy, you know? And it's just another way to make sure, one, that I'm getting max output out of them. Like if you jump twice a week all year round, you can't tell me that without any incentive that you're going to give a max effort jump every single time you step on the plate. I do this for a living, and I can tell you, as much as I know and care, I probably still wouldn't. So why would I expect an athlete who, you know, is dog tired and got 18 other things to worry about to jump? I expect them to care, but I want a max effort. Then I have to breed competition with it. And that's kind of how I've gotten results, or at least consistent effort from them time after time. And then it makes your data a lot more valid, you know?
I was going to say too, I know we promised the people we would talk about NSCA certifications.
Yeah.
So since you're strength and conditioning coach, like part-time sports scientist, how do you feel like the new NSCA certification maybe touched on some of that, or, you know, what all does that involve, and how do you feel like that maybe helped you with the sports science side of things?
Yeah. So as I told you, it kind of fell in my lap, and then I thought to myself, hey, what am I going to do this year or in this 2-year period? It's really kind of my frame that I try and really dive into something serious. What am I going to do to advance myself? And it just made sense. It just layered in. And so that was kind of my thought process of really diving into getting that certification. Obviously, it's the NSCA's first edition of that book and the certification. I do think they have some room to grow in how that material flows, how much of it is actually practical and useful. There were some major takeaways, and then there were some things on brainwave, bipolar modeling that I would never use. You would only use if you're a doctor in the clinical setting, you know, doing a sleep study, things like that, you know. So I do think there's parts of it that maybe repeated itself, or were so far off applicable that it didn't really relate to me, and it kind of lost me. But a lot of the way that the exam even came across in testing format was case studies, and that's what we do on a regular basis. Like we sit here and we get our athletes and we look at the quantitative metrics of them, and we basically, you know, physiologically, where do we go from here to help them be the best athlete? So I would recommend it to people with caution right now. I would wait until they kind of revamp that book and make it make sense and tie together a little bit better.
Are jobs asking people to have this certification right now, or is this?
It depends.
Yes.
I don't know, Scott, you might have something different.
Some are, and some aren't. I think a lot depends on the role that you're going for, right? So there are some. It's one of those highly recommended kind of things in the qualifications, oftentimes, just like CSCS is in a lot of things, right? Especially.
And I haven't looked into it, but like, do you have to have your CSCS first to be able to do it? Is it like a tier certification?
To apply for this test I'm surprised they didn't need my social security number and my birth certificate. Like it's somewhat extensive paperwork, but on their side of things, they have to do it to make sure that not anyone can get the certification, which I respect. Like you have to have certain degrees. There's a few different routes that you can take in applying for it, but there are a lot of prerequisites that you have to meet, and people that have to sign off stating that you have a job that is what it is and that entails things that this certification would benefit firsthand.
As a PT, that was like one of the, from what I remember when I did mine, our degree carried over a lot of the prerequisites. So there wasn't nearly as much as maybe somebody without the doctorate PT degree, maybe somebody with a bachelor's in exercise and sports science or a master's. I know there were different levels like Katie's talking about, but I didn't need anybody to sign off on anything. My degree stood for itself, which was really helpful for me.
Katie, when did you get that? Your CPSS?
October.
Yeah,
and very recent.
Yeah, it's fresh. Do you feel like at any point of the studying, was there information that was unexpected on the test for you? Was there content that you felt as though this truly as a process is something that is novel to me?
No, there were either things that were a refresher for me, either things that were on the topics that I'm interested in and I care about that made me see through a different lens. Yeah. And then, like I mentioned, there were a bunch of clinical things in there that I will probably never use, but I can see maybe why they wanted to put that in there. But honestly, some of the cool takeaways were looking at wearables and IMU units and different radio frequencies and things that like I would have never even thought to look for or ask about when purchasing or talking to these reps about, navigating those type of things and what will work best in your environment and why. So those things were cool and definitely directly applicable to what I'm doing now.
Yeah, well, the question, right, and we talked about this a little bit already, which is who fits this role, because there's a difference, right? I mean, there's an ultimate difference in the application or delivery and integration of testing, and then the inferencing and interpretation of said data from the tests.
Yeah,
because I think that's the issue with the way that the model is trending, which is towards a unique individual that is your data sports scientist, right? A standalone individual, because to your point is like, you already have a job. The PT already has a job. The athletic trainer already has a job. That job is pretty well accounted for in client care, patient interactions, or athlete interactions, et cetera, et cetera. So you hire this other person. The problem with that other person is if they don't have enough intuitive knowledge of the sport, of the questions being asked, and ultimately, if they're just going to run stats and data, then somebody still has to go back and interpret that. So it's this weird continuum at the moment of, I don't think anybody really knows who that person should be or what. It kind of like, on the PT strength coach side, it's this muddy area that's becoming somewhat convoluted of like, well, it's a strength coach that should do that. Well, maybe it's a PT, but realistically, we're asking two different questions.
Yeah.
So, right.
This is how I explain it. This idea, Chris, is in its infancy stage. No one has the answer because it's never existed before.
Yep.
And now that we have the personnel, the resources, and the knowledge to basically like let this thing grow, no one knows what those roles are. So kind of back to Megan's question, when I said all these things are blended, you have to understand that if I'm looking for a specific sports scientist to be a sports scientist, and like you said, like let them be good at the data, I don't expect them to understand how this applies to sport. Like that's where we come in, so I think in a perfect world, you have a PT or sports medicine representative, you have a strength coach, you have a sports scientist, and you have a head coach minimally. And those sectors all make up your umbrella of how to integrate in to a better performance model, Now, that's still not happening at the highest level of college athletics now. So what makes me even think that lower Division I or mid majors even have the possibility to do this? That's far down the road, but I do think it's coming. So that's where I think this certification for me, I wish it would have showed me more of how things are related. When this person shows, for example, an average braking asymmetry of this, also you have to look for a change of direction asymmetry in a
5-10-5 or a flying 10. Right.
And the sports scientist is not going to know that. But I think that's where, if I'm the NSCA and they called me right now and they were like, what's one big feedback you can give to us? That is a point of feedback I would give. How do we take out all the chapters of all this brainwave, bipolar, modular, all these big words and get someone in there to write a chapter about how this can be literally applied to field settings, and how things are related, because you're going to continue to get all these technology pieces that say that they all fit into a cloud or AMS system, but guess what? They're still just data until we learn
to be interpreted
with them. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's my point, right? So having those 4 people that you identified as these kind of arbiters and seats at the table, do those people need the CPSS? Was it broad enough? Was it too broad that nobody really took enough away from it? Does there need to be separate tests? As in, I would imagine most medical providers, right, if we subdivide those domains, the medical representative, it should be asking questions that are uniquely qualified and representative of their credential. And as with everybody, it should be asking questions. The coaches should be asking questions about wins, losses, procedural, strategic orientations. The strength coach probably has was the CPSS unique enough, or was it too broad that everybody's like, well, if somebody came to you and said like, yeah, I've got my CPSS, does that mean anything to you? Is that going to mean anything in the matter of implementation at this level, at this actionable level, right? Because a credential is a credential at the end of the day.
From the way that it is tested, I think it's specifically geared toward a strength coach or a sports performance coach at any level.
Okay.
I don't think it would be out of the realm for maybe a PT to take it, or maybe just a personal trainer, but I don't think it would benefit them right off the bat. I think if you're in a team setting and you are in a sports performance setting, and I understand when you get into the clinical settings of that, things are a little bit more hybrid or a little bit more integrated. But if who you want to work with and what you want to do is performance, whether that is in an individual setting, group setting, or in a team setting, and you have access to technology and you understand those at a level that this certification would layer in your ability to make sense of that. Like if I don't have a basic foundation of anything else I do, this certification would absolutely overwhelm anybody.
Right.
Agreed. So, but ultimately, like if you don't have the bandwidth, you have to have some requisite knowledge, because you can't do both jobs. I don't think there's a professional out there that has the bandwidth, because you wouldn't have the time to program and spend the time in the gym and be with your athletes. Even if you knew both domains extremely well, you still there's just not enough time to do that.
Hey, Chris, the other thing to think about, and what I found is in a lot of the sports science jobs that are out there, they do maybe require the CPSS, but really what they're also requiring that a lot of strength coaches, a lot of PTs and others don't have is the programming skills. They're not programming in R, or they're not programming in SQL or Python.
Some of that is because go ahead.
But that's really what they're asking for, right? So yes. I think what the CPSS, and even for us in PT, the CSCS, right? What it does is it kind of maybe broadens your understanding of what some of the other roles are out there doing.
Certainly.
So that you can ask good questions and kind of talk on the same language. You're not supposed, obviously strength and conditioning is a little bit different, but you can talk the same language. You can kind of fill in the gaps a little bit and expect them to be, the expert in it, but you can at least have a very good, well-balanced conversation trying to promote the health of your athletes and what other.
And like I said, I think it's a good idea. It wasn't, I didn't mean to give that impression. It's just more so you stepping into taking this exam and getting the certification.
Yeah.
It's just important to remember that at a fundamental level, like if you're trying to be a sports scientist, I think that has gotten a bit polluted and a bit murky and kind of been pirated by so many different things that, we do a little bit of data collection, so we do sports science. It's like, I think that's a far cry than running like really, really integrated, overlaid model representations of injury metrics, of like legitimate data analytics, and then being able to interpret, much more dense statistical models. That's where I'm putting that. And I just think that I hope that this doesn't give the impression that you sitting for an exam, from the little bit that I've understood, and I'm planning to sit and take this at some point because it's stuff that I care about anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
But I just think it's kind of in the same way that taking your CSCS somehow makes you a strength coach.
Right.
I would balk at that the same, right? Like it would be the same thing.
It's exactly.
I cannot agree more, because there are plenty of younger coaches in the field that I talk to now that I've come across two of them where they're sitting in on this, or they're studying to sit for the exam, and they're like, this is what I want to do. I'm like, what do you want to do? You want to be a coach, or you want to be a sports scientist, or you want to be both? Well, I want to be both. Okay, well, are you a good coach? Like, do you have any other certification? Well, what's your floor experience? Oh, nothing. So it's just it can go either way, But to your point, Chris, it definitely can get diluted. It definitely can get murky, and I think so many people just throw sports science out there. Those two words are almost like when people use the word fitness. I just can't stand it. It's like the F word to me. I can't stand it. So sports science, if you're not careful, can kind of bleed into that. And this can just be an overused phrase that people falsify their resumes or make themselves seem more important. And I told my boss from the get-go, I was like, I want to take it, to advance my career. I don't want to be a sports scientist right now. That is not my goal. Everything in my job description first. And then the second, it's not going to take my time away from these athletes out on the floor, taking care of them in person. It is only after the fact. And if we can't get someone in here that can, then what we've started doing is I've started meeting with our bioengineering department and those type of people and some professors on campus that are meeting with me, and they're helping us run some statistical analysis.
Exactly.
And they're doing that. It just helps me, like Scott said, speak their language. So when they're like, what do you need? Like, I'm working on one professor right now on doing a study with beach volleyball, and we're looking to start that over the next month or two. And it helps me speak his language of what he wants, because I think the certification helps lay the foundation of like where his brain lies and where the applicable part of what I need, it helps kind of bridge that communication gap. So definitely needed there, because if I don't have that, or if I'm not able to speak his language in any way, shape, or form, then we don't get anything done.
Yeah. I'm sure there'll be some questions, Katie, if you don't mind, us linking like your email. There may be questions just about the exam. At the end of the day, like obviously it's a valuable certification. There's nothing to knock there. Do you feel like an individual that maybe as a physical therapist, being that's mostly who is listening to this podcast, do you think this is something that if you've had your CSCS for a little while, but maybe you've never done any authentic group-based training, right? Because there are plenty of PTs that will use their CSCS, but they're using it uniquely in clinic, which is usually one-on-ones or at a maximum, like maybe 2s, 3s in their 4s kind of thing, but nothing near what you would consider a team-based atmosphere. Do you think that is an appropriate thing for them to pursue? Are they ready to do that if they spent some time as a strength coach and are curious about sports science? Is this an avenue to go there, or would you think, maybe you should explore that in other avenues first?
It really depends on what they want to achieve long term. So if they are looking to get more integrated into the sports performance side over the next year, 2 years, or 5 years, then I would say it's definitely something you should start informing yourself of and making sure that you understand, human anatomy and biomechanics and kind of the functional part of sports performance and less corrective exercise, if you will. I still think it would be a bit of a stretch, but it would definitely challenge them in ways that they would never get challenged, especially if you're at a PT clinic that starts to have all these technology things, right? Mm-hmm. So you start to, like, that is their job as well as ours. You test and retest and retest. And if technology is going to start being a part of a daily or weekly regimen inside of your facility, I think you can definitely manage without this certification. However, I do think it gives you a better broad understanding of maybe how all these things integrate. If someone asked me right now, hey, I need you to say yes or no, whether a PT would highly benefit from this right now, my answer would be no.
Great.
Maybe that will change whenever they revamp it down the road. Or if a PT is like, hey, I've been in physical therapy for a while. I have this foundation. You kind of have this special case, of
of course.
This is my setting. This is my niche, and this is kind of where I want to go. Boom. Then if you check those boxes, then obviously that will lead you to this. But right off the bat, not that I don't think it would be beneficial. I think it would be a far stretch, and I think there's better certifications you get in the meantime that you can use.
Yeah, it's not about saying that it's not valuable, right? And I would never say that. It's just more so immediately, or are you ready to consume that information? All learning is good inherently, right? Like there's a value in exploring and investigating. But if you're not at a place, both physically, emotionally, and professionally, to integrate that knowledge, then it becomes kind of a passive. It just becomes a passive thing, right? That's a passive badge.
I will add this too, Chris. If they don't have a base foundation of statistics, you will get lost right away. So maybe that's the breaker. If you are good at statistics and you have a basic foundation and you want to do it, maybe it won't be too far over your head. But man, if you don't know statistics, it will not be for you. Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, I think it's super valuable information. There's tons of questions coming out about that. And again, the PT community, we're really good at seeing what everybody else is doing and kind of like,
we love certifications. The more the better. It's
we
crazy.
love to put some letters behind a name.
If your name extends onto 2 lines, like you
Katie, where can people find you? What's a good link for people to kind of find you at Instagram or otherwise?
Instagram is probably where I'm most active. That is all lowercase steel, like weights, steel _Gill. I've been nicknamed Gill since I was a college athlete, and that's what my athletes know me as. I'm Coach Gill, so Still Gill is what my Instagram handle is.
Still Gill.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, no, we appreciate this, Katie. Seriously, it's so refreshing.
I hope I help somebody.
I'm sure
you
do.
No, you'll be amazed. Again, this is a common thing, and if we can continue to expand into other kind of multidisciplinary avenues, it does nothing but help, right? I mean, building language and creating commonality, that's all this is about. So
I love
your journey is super interesting.
I love what you guys are doing, because I do think as our fields grow, they're definitely becoming more interlocked than ever.
Yeah.
And that communication on terminology and foundation for what each other does is now more important than ever, for sure.
100%.
You're a rock star. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Katie, stay on for a second when we're done here, but we're going to end the stream.
Yeah,
and if you guys have any questions, again, reach out to Katie, reach out to Chris, or any of us on here. Again, thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening or whenever you watch this. So thanks, everyone.